Vulnerability assessment. We have a police officer who's been trained by Homeland Security, and he has offered to go through each of our schools, both interior and exterior, to determine if there's anything else that we can do to provide extra safety and security for our schools. So he has a very different set of eyes than ours, and so we're quite delighted. We met with him last week, and he's starting this week to go through our schools. That will take a little while. He has a full-time job that he's trying to, as a police officer, and he's trying to do this as well as regular assignments. So it may take a little while, but he did say he would be starting this week. So we're quite delighted by that. We're not sure where we will go with that. I did ask him to look at the 3 schools that do not have that airlock vestibule area first, so that if there is anything that we need to do in terms of one-time construction or getting those buildings ready or changing the layout in some way, that we could start on those, and the board would be well aware of that, the facilities committee, and then the finance committee and the full board, if we needed any of that. An additional security guard at Rockville High School. This was asked for in the budget request that came in November. We do have 1 security guard and 1 paraprofessional at the high school. It's a huge building. There are 1,000 students, another 250 adults working in that building. And I've forgotten the number of entrances and exits that there are in that building, but you know it was built in several stages, and so there are many twists and turns in that building. And so they have asked for an additional security guard. Right now, one person has a lot to do just to maintain peace and safety in that building. And so that was a request of the high school. Central office entrance redesign. If you've been in this building, which you have many times, but if you've been in this building during the day, you'll know that there's not much in terms of security. You can come in the side door and come all the way up the stairs to this floor or to the 2nd floor without ever being noticed by anyone on the 1st floor. And we looked at this over a year ago, trying to reorient the entrance. And if you came in the 1st floor today, you saw a little bit of construction that started today. This is the 1st day. So we've been looking at this for quite a while, and so finally we're going to have some movement on that. And there will be an airlock area, so someone will come into the building and will have to present their identification, and they will call up to the 2nd or 3rd floor or the 1st floor, or wherever the visitor would like to visit. A logistics coordinator. This was one of the positions that we changed early in the fall, and our logistics coordinator is with us here tonight, behind me, Corey Fontaine. And part of his job is called building access and control, and that was what he started to do early on. He's the one who got moving on our time and attendance, our badges, our ID badges. He also was the one who assured that we could have access to the cameras remotely. So he's looking at that. He's gone through all of the schools to suggest, and this was all early in the fall, to suggest anything from a safety and security standpoint, from an access standpoint for all of our buildings to the board, so anything we needed to put in our budget. Background checks. We do background checks, of course, as we're required to, on employees, on student teachers, and on interns. Those are dual background checks. They're with the Department of Children and Families, and they're fingerprint background checks for state and national. So those we're required to do. The 3rd one that we're not required to do are our volunteers and chaperones. And I shared that with you, I think, early last fall or maybe last spring. We do background checks. They're Social Security number criminal background checks for the National Criminal Database for all of our volunteers and our chaperones. So if we can do them relatively quickly. Mrs. Buchanan is the one who does that. And so we are as assured as we can be that we're not putting a bad person with our children. We're also exploring right now, you've read in the paper, I'm sure, panic buttons. Those are those wireless buttons. You wouldn't see them, but we all know about that banks have those buttons that connect directly with the police station. We're looking exploring those. We've actually already had a company look at all of our buildings just to give us a price on what those would be, so that would be in every single school. We're looking at our intercom systems to assure that they're working 100%. We do have some of them that are not working in a few rooms, and we need to make sure that they are working everywhere. And additional cameras. As I said, we have cameras all over the high school, inside and outside. We may not need quite as many in an elementary school, but we do not have interior cameras in our elementary school. We have door cameras. And so that's something that we're also looking at. Another thing that to add to the list is that I did meet with the Parks and Recreation Department last week, and so we are looking at the extended day program and how we can assure that we don't have people just walking in and out of that and that they feel more secure. They have 3 locations, and so we've worked with them to figure out how we can provide a buzzer system, how we can provide to let them know when someone's coming to pick up a child, and let them go out of the building to the recess yard and be able to get back in without just leaving the door ajar or something in the door. So we worked with them last week. I think that's important as our parents, even though we as the school system don't run that program, I think there is a perception, it is the Park and Rec program, which is a town program, and there's a perception that that is an extension of the school day. So we're not talking about the security at night during rec basketball or on Saturdays. Those are choices. And even though this is a choice for our children to stay after school, I think that it does provide a little more security, and the Park and Rec department and their employees felt much better after our meeting as well. Threat assessment is when we receive a threat, how do you assess that threat? How do you put value on that threat? A threat could be a bomb threat on the bathroom wall, an anonymous bomb threat. We have very strict procedures as to how to follow that we received from the police department. We have, when you receive a phone threat, we have very, very strict procedures as to how to follow, that we follow for that. But what if you receive a threat that says, I heard my friend Sue telling Debbie that she was going to get her after school on the trails. That is a threat. How do we proceed there? I think that we look at those a little more, a little differently. Administration usually takes care of those, and we need to look very closely at our protocols in order to evaluate those kinds of threats. Work with the police to see when really should we have them step in, what type of threats. And so we make judgment calls right now, but I think we need, there's no black and white list, I don't think. So we need to just have conversations about at what point should we be calling in someone else to evaluate a threat. It might also be appropriate to have a committee that is trained in evaluating threats as well. Our school resource officer and our police will help us certainly with those protocols. The last area is safe school climate. You know this is something we've been talking about for a long time. Fostering a culture of respect, very, very key. We have to assess our climate. We've been doing that. We have had school climate surveys for 2 years. We are looking at areas, we're fine-tuning both the climate survey and the response to the survey. We've had anti-bullying activities, whether that is professional development, assemblies for students, developmental guidance. There are activities that we do to prevent bullying in the schools, because that certainly is threatening to our students. We need to assure that adults and students respect each other. It is absolutely a two-way street. It is not a one-way street. We need to make sure that differences are respected and that conflict is managed and mediated, not ignored, and also that we need to provide proactive strategies for our students. Developmental guidance, which is in the board's goals, is certainly something that can prevent or minimize conflict. Creating connections between adults and students, that trusting relationship with at least one adult is key. We are trying with advisor-advisee at the high school and advisor-advisee at the middle school. We're looking at smaller learning communities, such as the teams we have in the middle school. In the elementary school, you do have a small learning community. You have a teacher and 23 plus or minus students. but the academies at the high school in grade 9, the teams at the middle school, and then also the communication between adults and students. That is also not one way. It has to be encouraged, and it has to be both ways. The code of silence is the snitching thing. We have to get people to realize, our students to realize, that snitching is not a bad thing. We shouldn't even call it snitching. We have to get that culture of listening two ways, and students have to be able to go to a trusted adult and tell them what's going on. If one student hears something else that might happen, we have to believe our students are going to come to us and tell us so that we can help. That is absolutely key. So that two-way culture of respect, that two-way culture of listening has to be there to break that code of silence. That is about all I have for you on those 4 areas right now. I don't know if Chief Kenny or Fire Marshal Walker have something else, or if the board would like to ask questions. Mr. Holt?
Board members, questions for Dr. Conway or either the chief or the fire marshal? Mr. Percy.
I have 2 questions. One is about the security guard at the high school. Actually, the current one and the one on in the current budget, or for next year's budget. What's the training? Are these trained security guards? Obviously, they can't carry a weapon.
That's correct. Our current one is a retired police officer, and so he does have training that he brings with him, but you are correct. They are not armed, either one, and generally they would, they assist with law and order, more or less. They assist in getting students in the right places at the right time, calming things down, unfortunately interfering in a fight if one happens to happen, following a student out of the building if a child chooses to leave the building, and that would be an unsafe situation for a child to leave the building in the middle of the day. So they don't have training. They do go to trainings, but we don't have a training program for him. But we are very fortunate that he happened to be a police officer, a former police officer.
So when you're looking for if the other one's approved, are you going to look for similar background?
That's what we're hoping for, yes.
My other question is with the background checks. Teacher gets hired, you do a background check, there's no follow-up? Anyone that works for a student?
That is correct. We've actually bounced around the idea of every year taking a small sampling of employees and redoing it. We would have to get their permission to do that. They'd have to sign off and do their fingerprints again. I'm not sure what DCF and the FBI and the state police would do when we started sending in all these additional fingerprints. But you're right, the legislation tells us that we have to do this when someone is hired, and that is all. We have teachers who have been here many, many years who were hired prior to that legislation taking place, and so they have never been fingerprinted. They have just continued to work for us. We also, for our volunteers and our chaperones, we are doing that once. And really it's a monetary thing. It's also a logistics thing. To do that every year, to do the thousands that we have are quite a lot. And our feeling was, as soon as the state decides that they're going to step up the legislation and for the teachers and all the employees, then we certainly will do that with chaperones and the volunteers as well.
Thank you.